Jocko Willink, welcome to the Dad Edge podcast. It is fantastic to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. This has been a long time coming. I wanted to have you on for quite some time. And what I'd like to do is I've been a big fan of your work. I've heard you on a lot of different shows. I've read all of your books. I love, I just got done reading Dichotomy of Leadership for the second time. What I'd really like to do is just point this particular interview in the direction that I don't think you get to talk about very often, and that's, being a husband and father. Where I'd really like to start is, I know your mom and dad, they were both educators. They were both in your life, but maybe let's just start with your childhood. What was it like growing up for you?
I had a fairly normal childhood, actually. I grew up in a small New England town. I was kind of average at everything. My parents were both school teachers. I was pretty rebellious as a kid. Once I got a little bit, once I passed the age of 10 or 11, I started getting very rebellious and eventually joined the military.
And were you always looking towards the SEAL teams, or was that something that came up later in your military career?
Well, when I found out what the SEAL teams were, it seemed like it was a good fit for me because I liked the water and I heard it was really hard. So I like that aspect of it.
And so fast forward through Bud's training, and what were just some of the biggest takeaway lessons for you during Bud's training?
I mean, I think people make a big deal out of buds, like it's some big life-changing experience, and it's actually not that big of a deal. You do a bunch of exercises. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy for sure. It's hard. It's really hard. It's a sustained output over a long period of time. And if you're not comfortable in the water, or if you like to sleep a lot, or if you are physically or mentally weak, it's going to be, you're probably not going to make it through. But as long as you're just there and you want to make it through the program, it's not that big of a deal. I had fun. It was a blast, Was it hard? Yeah, sure. It was hard. It's hard to do a 4-mile timed run at 4:00 in the morning after you did, 500 8-count bodybuilders the day before. So is that hard? Yeah, sure. But it's nothing crazy. It's fine. I liked it.
And what would you say is harder, Bud's training or raising 4 kids?
I mean, I feel the same way about raising kids. Raising kids is a lot of fun, and the kids are great. There can be challenges at times, but most of the time with my kids, it's awesome.
Yeah, and just share with us, what does your family look like as far as the spread of the kids and the age ranges?
I have a 19-year-old daughter that's a sophomore in college. I have an 18-year-old daughter that's about to start her freshman year in college. She just graduated. I have a 16-year-old son that's going into his junior year, and I have a 10-year-old daughter that's going into 5th grade.
Outstanding. So you've got 3 girls, 1 boy. How does Jocko go about raising a girl versus a boy? What have been the big differences for you?
All my kids, I treat them pretty much the same. There's no big differences. I mean, it is what it is. The kids, and they have differences that are inherent in just being female or being male. Like I remember I had 2 daughters, and then I had my son, and my son would when it rained outside, he would go down to the edge of the street and watch cars go by and hit the puddles. And it was every time he saw wheels or vehicles or trucks, like he was like completely into it. And the girls, they were into girls stuff, stereotypical girl stuff. Even though I didn't have like dolls in the house, they would somehow appear and they'd play with them. So it's, other than that, I mean, they have their own kind of genetic differences, but other than that, I treat them all pretty much the same.
What were some of the things you've learned through your training, through the teams, through everything that you've done about, leadership? How do you go about, because I know your focus is leading businesses, leading what you're doing. How do you transition those leadership skills into fatherhood?
They're the same. I mean, you're in charge of a team and you're in charge of your family, and you have to lead your family the same way you lead a team. People always ask me what the differences are. There's no difference in the leadership tools. The big difference between leading a team and leading your family is that one of the things that I preach all the time for leaders is that they need to detach from chaos and mayhem and from their own emotions in order to not make emotional decisions about things. Well, as a family man, as a father, it's much more difficult to control your emotions when it comes to your own children, especially from the perspective that you want your kids to do great. You want them to have great life. You want them to excel in everything that they do. And when you know what you actually, because you're 30 years older than them, you actually know what they should do. You know what the right decision is. And if you force that decision upon them, it's just like forcing a decision on a subordinate that you say, hey, I'm ordering you to do this. You have no choice. If you make your kid feel that way, eventually it's not going to work out. So I always tell parents, your kids aren't going to be who you want them to be. They're going to be who they are. Now, do you have can you give them some guidance? You absolutely can. Can you steer them a little bit? You absolutely can. But if you try and box them into a situation that they're not intrinsically motivated for, it's not going to work out good, in my opinion.
So how do you then deal with kids that are defiant? And I'm talking about maybe the little things, like they won't clean their room, they won't do certain things around the house, they constantly argue. How do you go about discipline, and how do you go about not necessarily taking orders, but where they feel they have skin in the game?
Well, you got to give them ownership of things, right? If my kid's not going to clean their room, that's cool. Guess what? We're all going out for dinner and you're not going. Like there's got to be some level of consequence. You don't have to be, but just to go in there and yell and scream and say, you got to clean your room right now. This is the same thing as if I yell at you, you're my employee and I'm like, Larry, you better get this done right now. I'm going to fire you. Like you're going to do what I told you to do, but you're also looking for another job, and when you do what you're doing, you're not going to do it to the best of your ability. Whereas if I explain to you why it's important, hey, Larry, you know what? We got these clients coming over. We got to get this thing cleaned up. I really want to make a good impression on them. If we land these clients, then guess what? We're going to have some good influx of money and I'm probably going to end up giving you a raise. So that's what I'm thinking. Can you give me a hand? And all of a sudden you're motivated to clean because you realize how it impacts you. It's the same thing with your kids. Everything from explaining to your kids that if your room is dirty and there's an emergency in the middle of the night and the firefighters come in to rescue them and they're tripping and falling down, that could be the difference between life and death. Not to mention just, being a slob is not a good characteristic to have as a person. And so, yeah, those are the kind of things where you've got to really explain to your kids why. And a lot of times as parents, I see a lot of parents that just want their kids just to do what they told them to do just because, and I see the same thing with bosses. So the leadership is the same. Like I said, the difference is with an employee, I'll think, oh, you know what? If Larry doesn't want to clean up that area, I'll just fire him. But with your kid, you can't, and so you get emotional about it. So there's the difference.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on about detaching from emotions. Man, that is the hardest thing for us. I mean, fathers, mothers, is detaching from that emotion because we are so emotionally invested in these kids. So how do you detach from emotion when it comes to your kids?
First of all, I'm pretty good at detaching anyways, because it's something that I realized at a young age in the SEAL teams that it was very important for me to be able to do that. Because when you detach, you make better decisions. You can see more. You're just an infinitely better human being than you are when you're losing your mind, getting emotional and diving into chaos and mayhem around you. So for me, I have all kinds of little red flags that go up in my head if I start getting emotional. If I start raising my voice at one of my kids, I think to myself, oh, do you want to set an example for your kids where losing your temper is okay? Like, I never want to do that. I want my kids to realize what I realized, which is losing your temper is a sign of weakness. And I don't want my kids to see me as being weak. And, there's a weird dichotomy with that because some people get sucked into the idea. They remember their dad or their mom losing their temper and being scared of them. And they kind of respect that power. And the problem is there's an outward respect for the power, but inward there's a disrespect because you realize someone can't control their own emotions, and people that can't control their emotions are weak. So yeah, get control of your emotions and don't lose your temper. Look for the little signs when you're starting to get mad, take a step back, take a breath, and try and discuss things like a human being.
Do you think part of that from detaching from emotion is detaching from the expectation of the end result?
Yes, you could do that, but you've also got to remember that if what you said is true, that wouldn't be a good solution, because if you lose your temper, your end result is going to be worse. So you should actually think about the end result, because the end result that you're looking for is more likely to come to fruition if you control your emotions and your temper. If you want to do the opposite and drive people away from you and not be a good leader, then you'll lose your temper. So yes, wrong, actually. What you want to do is you want to think about the end result. What you want to think about is you want to think about things strategically. You want to think about the long game, not the little tactical fight that you're in with your kid right now. You want to think about, how does your kid view you? What is this battle worth? How much leadership capital am I going to invest in making my kid do this particular thing right here? And is it worth the leadership capital? Because sometimes you got to give your kids the leeway to make mistakes. You got to give your kids the leeway to do some things that aren't the smartest things to do at that particular time. And you let them do it and you let them learn. And they realize that you're building that increases the trust between you two, because when you allow people to do things, just like employees or subordinate leaders, when you allow them to execute things on their own, they realize that you trust them. And when you trust them, they trust you, and you have a better relationship. And that's what it's about.
I love that. I've heard you say a quote as well, is that when you look at your team's capabilities and you have to plan accordingly to what they can do, not necessarily what you can do. And I remember you sharing an example on another podcast about, like, well, if you can carry a 100-pound ruck for 10 kilometers in 2 hours, but a guy on your team can carry it in 5 hours, the mission's going to fail. And people identify, an effective leader is knowing what your people on your team can identify, how they identify with you. So when it comes to leading your kids, what is most important for your kids to identify with you?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So I heard you on another podcast talk about.
Yeah, I got that part.
Yeah.
So my point was on that was, if I can ruck whatever you just said, 10 kilometers with 100 pounds in 2 hours, but you can do it, you can only do it in 5 hours, then it's not that the mission's going to fail. It's just that I need to plan to take 5 hours. So,
Right.
and if I plan to do it in 2 hours, we will fail.
Right.
So I think maybe what you're talking about, are you talking about the limit, recognizing the limitations of your own children?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, yeah, well, that's certainly true, and you absolutely have to recognize the limitations of your kids. And the common mistake that I would make sometimes would be, a 7-year-old is going to act like a 7-year-old, and you can't expect a 7-year-old to act like a 30-year-old, which is sometimes what we put on our kids. And so you sometimes you have to put yourself in check. That being said, I often see parents do the opposite, which is treat a 7-year-old like they're a 3-year-old. And, you have to allow your kids to you have to allow your kids to make, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. How hard is it to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? It's not that hard. Can a 5-year-old do it? Yes, they can. Do they make a little bit of a mess? Yes, they do. Do they have to then clean up the mess? Is the bread a little bit tore up and it's not the perfect sandwich? Yes, absolutely. But that kid is learning skills. They're becoming reliable. They realize that you trust them. So yes, you have to know their limitations, but you also have to push them beyond their limitations a little bit.
How can we do that in the most supportive, but maybe even in a direct manner without overwhelming them? I think about the example of sports all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You see parents in the stands and they're constantly pushing. They know the potential of their kid. The kid ends up hating the sport because they're pushed so hard. How do you know when to push them when you know that they're capable of pushing past their limitations? However, because it's us, we're maybe pushing them too hard. How do you know that balance?
That's something that you're going to constantly be modulating the whole time you're raising your kids. And with my kids, I pushed them really too hard with jiu-jitsu when they were younger. And I had them at a very young age training and competing all the time. And by the time my daughters especially were 12 years old, they were done. They didn't want to train anymore. And, they're finally they got into it later, but, I pushed them too hard. And finally one day I said, oh, I had to recognize, oh, you've pushed them too hard. You're making them hate this. You need to back off. And that's what I did. So you just have to constantly modulate. And the most important thing, depending on the age group that you're talking about, is, and this is what I say to kids or to parents with jujitsu, is the number one thing to do is make it fun for them. Yeah. You have to make it fun for them. If it's fun for them, they want to do it. If they want to do it, they practice. If they practice, they get better. If they get better, they win. If they win, it's more fun. If it's more fun, they practice. And it's a great cycle of advancing their skill based on the foundational fact that it's fun for them. Mm-hmm. Winning is fun. In order to win, you have to practice. In order to practice, you have to like doing it. If you're going to like doing it, it has to be fun. So the biggest thing with me with these, when you're trying to get your kids into something, is to make it fun for them. And then as they get a little bit older, they start to realize, and what you have to do as a parent is make the connection for them between the suffering and the discipline of practice and training. Now we're talking 10, 11, 12, 13, the discipline and the pain of suffering, and how that will bring you the fun and the long-term goal, the long-term gratification. The short-term suffering will bring you the long-term gratification. So that's something that you have to do as a parent. Try and make that connection. And then you also have to give your kid breaks. And the other thing is, it's been proven over and over again that if you specialize in one thing, it's actually not as effective for children in athletics as having them do a broad bunch of different athletics. So that's an easy way to mix it up and make things fun, is you don't sit there and grind them out with one sport. There's all kinds of examples in sports of the better athletes are the ones that played multiple sports. So don't grind them out on one thing, and connect the pain with the fun in the end once they get a little bit older. And when they're younger, I would say single digits. Your main goal as a parent is to make it fun.
How do you connect the pain and suffering with the fun? Like, what does that conversation look like?
Hey, when they do a good job, and how did that feel?
Yeah.
And they get the smile on their face, and you say, why you were able to do that? You were able to do that because you worked really hard. That's why you were able to win. Doesn't that feel good? Yeah, let's keep training. So that's a really simple conversation.
How about when I love that, because so how do you do that proactively? So the kid comes to you and they're like, I just don't want to do, and it could be anything. It could be anything. It could be sports, it could be homework, it could be studying, it could be anything that requires them to do something that they don't feel like doing at the time. How do you connect that joy with the suffering that they're about to go through?
Yeah. I mean, again, as an adult, you're the one that can see, and you just very simply talk them through this. Don't you want to get 100 on the test? Well, yeah, of course I want to get 100 on the test. If you go make flashcards right now with these vocabulary words on them, and it'll take you a half an hour, and you will know them 100%, and you will get 100 on this test. Do you want to go for it? Okay, yeah, let's go for it. So you just have to explain to the kid what that outcome is, and that there's a little bit of suffering and pain to get there.
I think that's really where we miss as parents. We don't talk about that end state, that desired end state, that vision of what could be. We're just talking about the right now. Oh no, you have to go do this right now, without that end state. I think that's probably what we're missing.
Yeah. I used to do this thing if my youngest daughter, and I don't know if this is child abuse or what, but my youngest daughter was watching a movie or something, and I'd come in and this is when she was like 4 or 5, and I'd like push on her head, and I'd say, oh, and I would just say, I can feel your brain. It's getting kind of soft. And she would like touch her head, and then she'd just turn off the TV. So yeah, that's the kind of thing where it's maybe a little bit extreme, but the screen time that people get can be a little bit overwhelming, and can be unhealthy. So you got to put it in check sometimes.
I'm going to steal that.
Oh, telling your kid that their brain is turning into mush?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think the key characteristic of me doing it wasn't the fact that I said, you better stop watching TV. It was, hey, I can feel this. I feel your head. I can feel it. And the fact of the matter is, I'm actually telling the truth, because when a kid is sitting there watching TV in their developmental stages, they are not developing neurons the way they should be, the way they would be if they were reading, or if they were writing, or if they were drawing, or if they were building something. That absolutely stimulates better brain growth. So I'm actually telling my kid the truth. I can feel the brain getting mushy. Don't let it happen. And my daughter, that's my youngest daughter, and she's a voracious reader, and she's a really good writer. And it's pretty impressive for a little girl that just turned 10 years old. She wrote a poem this last year, and I read it, and I kind of said, ooh, it was really, really good. And believe me, I'm not the kind of parent that says everything my kids do is great. I'm the opposite of that. I'm the parent that says, oh, that's a marginal poem. Hey, that's normal. Any kid would write that. It's not that good. So when I saw this poem, I was pretty impressed. But yeah, so you have to connect the future with the present for kids. And you said that we miss it as parents, but the fact of the matter is our school system often misses that as well. And kids are just told to do homework. They aren't explained why. And the why is the most important thing. It's the most important thing as a leader that you have to explain to your subordinates. It's also what you have to explain up the chain of command. You have to explain to your boss why you're doing something so that he gives you the support that you need. So, if you think about that all the time with your kids, then it makes sense. And then some people get mad about that because they don't want their employees or their kids ever questioning the demands and the edicts that they put out. And if you're that person, then you're not doing a good job as a leader. And one more point, if your kid asks you why you want them to do something and you can't answer the question, you're wrong. Like, how can you want your child to do something and not be able to explain why it's important? That's crazy to me. That's absolutely crazy. Are you actually telling your child to do something that doesn't have a good outcome? Because if it is going to have a good outcome and a positive impact, then you just have to explain that to them. So yeah, these are the correlations between leadership of any kind of team and leadership of your own family.
Agreed. And you talk a lot about, when it comes to leadership, the balance between ego and humility. And what does that balance look like in the family? And I'm sure you're probably going to say it's the same. But how do you teach and exemplify that balance to kids?
It is absolutely. I went up to talk with some low income children in Los Angeles, and kids that are going through hard times with single parents, underprivileged kids. But the interesting thing about this group, it was a group of underprivileged kids that had like good test scores. So they were smart kids, but they were from bad neighborhoods. And I was going to go, one of the points I had to talk to them about was staying humble and how you got to be humble as a person. Well, when I got up there, I looked at the kids, and every one of the kids had, when you think of underprivileged kids from bad neighborhood, a lot of times people think of someone that's hyper aggressive, someone that doesn't care and will get in your face. These kids were not that. These kids were underprivileged kids, but they, like I said, they were smart. They had academic potential, and all of them, I looked at the room, they all had bad posture. They were all slumped over. They were shy to ask questions. They would barely raise their hand. And so when I talked to them, I didn't talk to them about humility at all. I actually talked to them about confidence. And I got them all to sit there and straighten up. And when they had to ask me a question, stand up and project your voice and don't mumble. So there's absolutely a dichotomy with ego and confidence and humility, and you have to find the right balance. And so, you see that all the time with kids. And, my kid, my son, he's a big kid. He's been doing jiu-jitsu his whole life. He wrestles. He's a very good wrestler. And I was having a conversation with him about getting in a street fight situation. And I was basically saying, hey, listen, you need to, don't run your mouth. You keep your mouth shut. And, I don't know if you know this, but I live in California, and there's surfing out here. And surfing is, even though it has a reputation of being this soulful, peaceful sport, it's actually it's a very aggressive environment, and it's a very hostile environment in many cases. And so there's fights actually in the water and on the beach related to surfing. And anyways, I was talking to my son, just giving him some guidance about getting in fights. And I said, hey, when someone's talking to you, just ignore them. I said, because you don't want to get in a fight, because if you get in a fight, one of these people one day is going to give you a beat down. And he looked at me and said, who? Because, he fights all the time, because he's on the mat all the time, and he wrestles all the time, and does jiu-jitsu all the time, and he fights a lot, and he boxed and did more. So he's got skills. And, but that right there clued me in. And this was when he was 14. And that clued me in that obviously he needed to get his ego put in check, which I promptly did. So it's one of those things. You've got to weigh your kid. You've got to assess your kids all the time, because it's not like one kid doesn't have confidence at all in anything. People will be confident in one arena, but not confident in another arena. People will be egotistical in another arena and be completely humble in another. So you have to constantly check your kids and see where they're at, and make sure they're not going too far in one direction or the other. Because if your kid gets arrogant, they do dumb things. Hey, I can't get caught. Hey, I won't fail this test. They get that attitude, and that's what happens. So, and then the other side of the spectrum is they won't do anything new. They won't try anything new because they're embarrassed. They don't think they'll look cool. So that's, again, this is the challenge of being a parent. It's the challenge of being a leader, of trying to find out where people are at in their confidence level, whether it's too far and they become egotistical, or where it's not enough and they lack confidence. So it's something you constantly have to look for. How do you then develop a person? How do you then tame or encourage their confidence? It's a pretty simple idea. If you have somebody that lacks confidence in something, what you do with that person is you put them in situations that they can handle. So if you've got someone that lacks confidence in jiu-jitsu tournaments, right, where they don't want to compete because they're scared and all this, what you do is you put them in a very small tournament and you put them in a weight class that's very comfortable for them. You put them at a skill level that they can handle, and then cool. They go and they do good and they survive, or maybe they even win, and their confidence goes up a little bit. And you just, okay, let's do that again. And now you put them in a little bit harder competition. You put them in a little bit harder competition, and you just keep getting them better and better until they feel confident. The other end of the spectrum, if you've got someone that's cocky and arrogant, well, then you say, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to put you in a tournament then. And you put them in a tournament, a tough tournament where they're going to meet and face. I mean, you could do this in the training room too. You put them in, you make them wrestle against a kid that's a dominator, and they'll get humbled real quick. When my son was his freshman year, the very first varsity tournament he did, there was, I think, 64 people in the bracket, or 48 people in the bracket, and he was number 48. He was a freshman. And, he was 13 years old going against an 18-year-old grown man. And he thought he was a pretty good wrestler. For a 13-year-old, he was. But yeah, I said, hey, go out there and do your best. And the guy went out there and pinned him quickly, because the dude looked like the dude was a man. So my son got humbled. And so that's what you do. You put them in environments that steer them in the right direction in terms of their confidence, their humility, and their ego.
I love that. It's really about assessing the individual kid. You have 4, I have 4. They're all completely different. And you have to know those areas where, like you said, where they're very, very confident, where maybe their egos are high, or you have to know where they're also, they lack the confidence, but putting them in situations where if they're not confident, putting them in situations where they can potentially succeed and get some momentum and get some successes under their belt.
Yeah. And you also have to be careful that you're not throwing them softballs.
Right.
They'll know that too.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying you can't ever throw them a softball, because sometimes you got to throw them a softball. But if you throw them, if they know you're throwing them softballs, they'll know it. And you think
Right.
you're throwing them and you're not. So you even tell them that, hey, that was pretty easy for you. That you can do better than that. You
Right.
don't need to say, oh, no, she was really good. No, you don't say that. You
Yeah.
say, hey, you dominated because you're better. And
Right.
you step up your competition level.
So this is a rather loaded question. So what's your view on participation trophies?
Um, I don't really know where I hear that term all the time, but I've never really seen it.
Yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean? I, I, I don't know if it actually happens. I mean, I've heard about like soccer where they don't keep score and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, it's a bad idea. You should be rewarded
mhm.
for winning. And if you don't win, you don't get anything.
Right.
That's normal. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of just I'm sure there's things that do it. I've never seen it before.
Yeah. Yeah. As a whole nother topic. Yeah, I know we've spent the first half of the show, a good amount of show, really focusing on fatherhood. I know you and your wife Helen have been married since 1997. Obviously, you're not married that long without some tremendous lessons of what it's like to be a man, a leader, uh, as far as partnerships, as far as individual self-care, friendship, intimacy, the whole nine yards. What have been some of the most valuable lessons you've learned about marriage?
So in the SEAL teams, there's about a 90% divorce rate. And luckily have been able to make it through a long SEAL career and then retirement and been married to the same girl the whole time. And she's, just a great person, a very nice person. And, we've have a good team and we mutually support each other and cover and move for each other as we take care of life. And, there was times where my wife was, I was going on deployment after deployment after deployment, and she was raising kids and fixing water heaters and changing oil and doing all that stuff that a man or a husband would normally do. She was handling all that. She was not only that, she was going to visit my guys in the hospital that were getting sent home from Iraq wounded, or going to my guys' funerals that were coming home, were killed in Iraq. So, she was I got very lucky in the fact that my wife is a very strong person. And one of the biggest things I say about my wife when people ask me about the success, one of the biggest traits that my wife has is, I say that the way I explain it is that she's emotionally independent, meaning that she doesn't rely on me to make her feel. I don't need to call her up and reassure her about things. She is assured of herself. She's confident and she's emotionally independent from me. And there's a dichotomy with that too, because could that go too far where all of a sudden they don't need you anymore? Sure, I guess that could happen. But, my wife's just a very good level of, emotional independence and just independence as well, where, like I said, she didn't rely on me to do anything. She supported me, let me do my career, and she took care of everything else. So that was awesome. The other thing that I'll say is I had a guy on my podcast named Captain Charlie Plum, who was a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton for 6 years. And it's still one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from my own podcast. And they had this rule. So they would get shifted around from room to room occasionally, every 3 months, every 6 months, maybe every year. They'd move from one room to another room and get new roommates. And they had a rule that if you got annoyed by your roommate, it was your fault. You had to deal with it. So if your roommate coughed or picked his nose or picked at his feet or whatever your roommate did that annoyed you and bothered you, it wasn't their fault. It was your fault. And I think and that's an attitude. When he said that, I realized that that's definitely an attitude that I have with my wife. If my wife is doing something that I don't like, it's not her fault. It's my fault. It's my fault for allowing something to annoy me. And, there's this whole idea of, hey, you need to be, what is it? They have some word for telling the truth at like an unlimited level. You just 100% candid all the time. And I think I get what they're saying. I understand the concept. I see why it sounds like a good idea, but actually, no. There's many times where what you have to do as a person is stifle your feelings, stifle your emotions, and let things carry on. You know, with my wife will do something that annoys me. She'll never know that. She'll never know it did. And if it's something that's annoying me, but it's having a negative impact on the family, then it's like, okay, we can address it, and I'll address it. I'll come in from a flank. And, you know, if I don't like the fact that she doesn't sweep up the sidewalk in the morning, guess what I'll do? Sweep up the sidewalk. Like that's, you know, I've said it on my podcast too. Oh, your wife's mad at you because you won't do the dishes. Guess what? Do the dishes. Well, I mean, how long does it take? It takes 7 minutes to do the dishes. Maybe it takes 5. It takes no time to do the dishes. And that's no dishwasher. That's just straight up, hey, sponge, dishwasher, or dish cleaning fluid and water. You're talking about a 6-minute evolution. You can invest 6 minutes into making your wife like feel comfortable about something. So what does this boil down to? This boils down to taking ownership. That's the name of the first book I wrote with Leif. It's like, yeah, take extreme ownership of what's going on. Take extreme ownership of the marriage. Take extreme ownership of things that annoy you. And instead of blaming everyone else, then you'll have a better life.
It's one of the biggest problems. I mean, so the divorce rate, like you said, in the SEALs is 90%. Divorce rate in the U.S. is 50%. I read a statistic that marriages that actually stay together, 30% of the marriages that stay together deem themselves as actually happy and thriving. Another 30% is happy enough not to break up. And the remaining 30% is miserable, but they won't break up for some reason or another. But you always find those blaming, you know, oh, it's her fault. It's his fault. She does this. It drives me crazy. And that is what I think is missing, is that ownership piece, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree. We've definitely gotten tons and tons of feedback over the years of people that read extreme ownership, and sure, they applied it to their business and it helped there, but they've told us it saved their marriage, it changed their marriage. And there's no doubt in my mind that that's helped at least as many people in their personal life as it has in their business life.
Yeah, because these skills are interchangeable. You know, whatever you're using in your business life, you can use them in your personal life. I think a lot of us think that they're two separate worlds, but we can use those skills interchangeably. I just have a couple more questions for you. One being, I look at you, I know how busy my life is with 4 kids, marriage. You know, you've got Echelon Front, you have your podcast, you have the books that you're writing, speaking events, you're consulting. And you've got a lot of people that constantly want something from you or need something from you. How do you balance all those demands and everything that you do with being that man that just shows up as the man that you want to be for your family?
Well, you know, I'm definitely busy all the time. And what I do is I don't sleep a lot, and I work when my family's asleep. You know, I've probably written 90% of the words that I've written in my books were written when everyone in my family was asleep. So I've never really thought about that before, but that's absolutely true. 90% of the words that I've written in my books were written when everyone in my family was asleep. The editing process, because there's a time demand on the editing process that's compressed, I've edited while my family's awake. In fact, I just got done editing a book. So what that is, you get comments back from the editor that says, you know, hey, this paragraph is unclear. So you're rewriting stuff, but it's due in 2 weeks. And so I've edited while my family was awake, but 90% of the words I've written in all my books, it was written when they were asleep. And so there's an example of that had zero impact on my family. And then you just, you make things happen to the best of your ability. You know, that's what you got to do. And I'll tell you something else. And this is kind of a strange thing, but I got asked this question the other day by a guy that I've worked with extensively at Echelon Front. And, you know, he said, hey, I wonder, like, I get nervous for you. And he's a great guy. He was asking me a really honest question, which is, I see how much you're doing, and I don't understand how you prioritize and execute with your family. How do you make that happen? And the fact of the matter is, my family, when I talked about the emotional independence of my wife, my whole family has that. My family doesn't really need me. As crazy as that sounds, my family doesn't really need me. My kids are so independent, and they're humans, you know. As soon as my son had his license, it was like he was totally good to go on his own. Hey, he's going to go to wrestling practice on his own. He's doing whatever, you know, he's doing what he needs to do. My older daughters, forget about it. You know, my older daughters, I never one time ever in their whole lives, or my wife ever told them to do homework or study for a test ever. And they're both straight A's, you know, going to great colleges. There was never a need for that. My oldest daughter, who just went to the state championships for wrestling, my middle daughter, who just went to the state championships for wrestling in California. I wasn't monitoring her cutting weight. She cut weight on her own. I didn't need to be making her meal or getting her on a scale. She did that 100%. Same thing with my son. I don't talk to him about what he's weighing or anything like that. These kids are independent. And so I think one of the benefits of raising your kids in a way that they develop the skills that they need is, by the time they're 13, 14, 15, all you're doing is monitoring traffic. You know, that's what you're doing. You're just monitoring to make sure that things are staying in the lane, you know. And that's why right now I invest most of my time into my youngest daughter, you know, as much as I can with her, because she's the one that's still in the most developmental stages. And I want to make sure that she ends up like the other kids, which is totally self-sufficient, independent, and ready to go out and conquer the world. So, and my wife is the same way. So the benefit of that is, since my wife handles a lot of stuff on the home front, and my wife also, she does like the domestic stuff. She also runs half of the businesses that I own. So she does she's basically the chief operating officer for some of the other businesses. So she's got her own work duties as well that she does. But she handles all that. She handles the domestic stuff. My kids are very independent. So what that means is, I guess where I'm going with this is, when I'm with my kids, it is like pure quality, 100%, like this is what we're doing. And I have a great relationship with my kids. We talk very openly. We text each other. But that's why, you know, I'm not sitting around, you know, when we're together. And so, and they know that. And the other thing is, you know, I used to tell this to young SEALs that were having a family. If they were thinking about getting out because of their family, which is a noble thing to do. And at the end of the day, when I retired because I needed to spend more time with my family. And part of that was because I wasn't very good at balancing the dichotomy between having a family and being a SEAL, because being a SEAL was the biggest priority for me. And I definitely lived my life that way. But when I retired, when I get these young kids, these young SEALs, and they'd say, well, you know, I'm thinking about getting out because I want to spend more time with my family. I'd say, hey, that's great. That's awesome. Here's the deal. For thousands and thousands of years, men have been loading on ships and going to war for years away from their family. That's not anything new. It's the way it has been forever. Or going away for a fishing trip for 3 months, or going on a exploration for a year or 2 years or 3 years. This is not abnormal. And what I think, and this is, again, when I'm trying to raise my kids, it's not all about how I interact with them. It's also about what they see from me. And I guarantee you, what they see from me is someone that works hard, someone that is up before they're up, someone that's awake before they go to, or stays up after they go to bed, someone that's working all the time. That's what they see. And I know that they know that and I've told them, hey, you want to know why I'm at where I'm at right now? It's not because I'm smart. It's not because I'm a gifted athlete. The reason I'm here right now where I'm at is because I work hard. And if you all work hard, you can do it too. But that's what it's about. So I think that's that's the answer. Is I have very independent family, and when we're together, we're together. And the part, a big part of me raising them and my influence over them has had nothing to do with my interaction with them. It's had to do with them seeing me, seeing the way that I live my life, and understanding that is what a good path is.
Living your own life and being the example. Your kids have seen you do it, so they're going to do it.
That's affirmative.
Absolutely. As we wrap up here, there's one thing. I've been doing this for several years now. There's one thing that I see with most men, and that is they live this life of quiet desperation and isolation, especially as fathers, especially as providers. And most men are on what we call the drift, which is that wash, rinse, repeat cycle. They're going to a job that they don't necessarily like. They're in a mediocre marriage. They're trying to find their way to being that father that they want to be. But men seem to talk when they're around other men in their lives. And it could be people that they work with, people they're friends with. We seem to kind of talk about the same 5 things, like the weather, our work, what we did on the weekend, that kind of thing. Very few men have a tremendous support network of other like-minded men in their life. And what I've seen is because men have such a hard time asking for help or asking for advice or asking for direction. And I know in the SEAL teams, it's all about the teams. And you have to obviously be an individual contributor, but the team is not successful without the other like-minded men and the brotherhood that you've had in the teams. So as we wrap up here, what advice do you have for men who are living that life of quiet desperation? They're living completely mentally and emotionally alone. We're surrounded by people living mentally and emotionally alone, and they want and need that brotherhood in their life, but they just don't know where to start.
Oh, go to jiu-jitsu gym. Go start training jiu-jitsu. That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Go work out. I don't know. I don't know that. Yeah, I've never really hung around with people that were living a life of quiet desperation. I go to a jiu-jitsu gym where we beat each other up and we have fun doing it. And then we work out, and I go surfing, and my company Echelon Front, every guy is working hard to try and do well and try and make things happen. So I would say if someone's in a situation like that, yeah, I would go straight to a jiu-jitsu gym, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym, and start training jiu-jitsu. Go get some. It's a good place to start.
Go get some. Well, man, this has been awesome, Jocko. I really appreciate you coming on today. I really appreciate you sharing your advice on leadership, on fatherhood, marriage, life, raising independent kids. We've covered a lot today, and I really appreciate you coming on today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Larry. It's good to meet you, and let me know. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
That sounds great to me.
Awesome, man. Take care, brother.
You too. Take care.